My name is Christina, and for the longest time, my name was spoken like a sigh in my family, an unfortunate footnote in the glorious story of the Vance family legacy. At 32, I was the resident disappointment, this strange, solitary daughter who had turned her back on the family's shining beacon, the Eleanor Vance Foundation for Global Betterment. To the outside world, my mother, Eleanor, was a saint in custom-tailored suits, a titan of philanthropy whose name was etched onto hospital wings and university libraries. To me, she was the architect of a beautiful, glittering lie, and I was the only one who refused to live inside of it. The schism wasn't over a petty squabble or a rebellious phase. It was over a truth I stumbled upon, a truth hidden in the digital bones of the organization. In doctored invoices, phantom consultants, and a web of shell corporations that siphoned money meant for the desperate and funneled it into offshore accounts. My refusal to participate, to take my designated seat on the board, branded me an outcast. They called me ungrateful, jealous, difficult. But the final straw, the event that would change everything, was the announcement that my mother was to receive the prestigious International Humanitarian of the Year award. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. I knew then that my silence had to end. The stage for her greatest triumph would become the platform for her spectacular downfall. I planned a little surprise for her annual fundraising gala, a night where the city's elite would gather to applaud her magnificent fraud. Just as she would step up to the microphone, basking in the glow of adoration to deliver her acceptance speech, the massive screens behind her, meant to display a montage of her good works, would switch to a different kind of presentation. It would be a flowchart, my masterpiece of quiet, painstaking investigation, tracing every stolen dollar from a disaster relief fund to a ghost company in the Caymans. And to make sure it wasn't just a flicker of rebellion, I had already leaked the entire dossier to a journalist I knew would be sitting in the front row, hungry for the truth. What would you do if the people you were supposed to trust most were the villains of the story? Before I dive into exactly how I pulled the curtain back on my family's empire of lies, I'd love to know where you're all watching from today. Let me know in the comments. And if you've ever felt like the black sheep for simply standing up for what's right, go ahead and hit that like button, and make sure you're subscribed to join our community of people who aren't afraid to speak their truth. It all started with my grandfather, Arthur Vance. He wasn't like the rest of my family. Where my mother saw perception as reality, my grandfather saw numbers. He was a certified public accountant, a man who believed that a ledger told a more honest story than any press release. He wore tweed jackets that smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and old paper, and his office was a sanctuary of quiet order. When I was a little girl, while my older brother, Leo, was being groomed for leadership at my father's side, I would sit on a stool in Grandpa Arthur's office, watching his long, careful fingers dance across the keys of his adding machine. He didn't talk down to me. He'd pull out old, leather-bound ledgers and show me the elegant dance of debits and credits. "Everything has to balance, Chrissy," he'd say, his voice a gentle rumble. "Every penny has a home. If it doesn't, it means someone is either a fool or a thief. Never be either." He taught me to see the world not just for what it appeared to be, but for what it was underneath. He taught me that integrity was a quiet virtue, one that didn't require an audience or an award. When he passed away, the light of that quiet integrity seemed to dim in our family, replaced by the blinding, artificial glare of my mother's ambition. The foundation was her baby, born a year after Grandpa Arthur's funeral. It was, she claimed, a way to honor his legacy of service. The hypocrisy of it still makes my throat tighten. When I graduated college with a degree in accounting, just like him, it was expected that I would join the foundation. I was genuinely excited at first. I believed in the mission, or at least, the stated mission. I wanted to help people. I wanted to use the skills my grandfather taught me to make a difference. And if I'm being honest with myself, a small, hopeful part of me thought that this would be my way back into the family's good graces. That by succeeding on their terms, they would finally see me, not as the awkward, questioning child, but as a valuable part of the Vance dynasty. Leo was already vice president, the charming face of the organization, shaking hands and smiling for cameras. My mother offered me an entry-level position in the finance department. "You can work your way up, darling," she'd said, patting my hand. "Prove you have the Vance grit." It felt less like an opportunity and more like a test. The first 6 months were a blur of paperwork and data entry. The foundation was enormous, with projects all over the world. We funded clinics in sub-Saharan Africa, built schools in Southeast Asia, and provided disaster relief after earthquakes and hurricanes. The scale of it was breathtaking, and for a while, I was swept up in the grandeur. The office was a testament to modern philanthropy, all glass walls, minimalist furniture, and large, beautiful photos of smiling children from far-flung places. It felt important. It felt real. My disillusionment began with a single invoice. It was for $90,000, a consulting fee paid to a company called Ethelred Solutions, LLC. I didn't recognize the name, which was unusual. I prided myself on knowing all our major vendors. The invoice itself was thin. It lacked the detailed breakdown of services rendered that was standard procedure. It just said, Strategic Outreach Consulting for the Amazon Basin Reforestation Project. It was signed off directly by my mother, bypassing the usual multi-level approval process. Curiosity, that old trait my mother so despised in me, got the better of me. I did a quick search for Ethelred Solutions. The address listed was a P.O. box in Wilmington, Delaware, a city notorious for its lax corporate registration laws. There was no website, no list of partners, no public presence whatsoever. It was a ghost. Using the Foundation's access to a corporate records database, I dug a little deeper. Ethelred Solutions was a single-member LLC, registered just 8 months prior. The registered agent was a generic corporate services company. It had all the hallmarks of a shell corporation. My blood ran cold. This couldn't be right. There had to be an explanation. My first stop was my brother's office. Leo's office was twice the size of mine, with a sweeping view of the city. He was on the phone when I walked in, laughing with someone, the sound smooth and practiced. He waved me in, finishing his call with a flourish. "Chrissy, to what do I owe the pleasure? Don't tell me you're finally ready to join the Gala planning committee. We need someone to handle the silent auction." He grinned, that perfect, camera-ready smile that made donors open their checkbooks. I held up the invoice. "Leo, have you ever heard of a company called Ethelred Solutions?" He glanced at it, his smile not faltering for a second. "Can't say I have. Mom handles the big strategic partnerships." "Why?" His lack of concern was a wall. "It just seems odd," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. $90,000 for a one-line invoice to a company that doesn't seem to exist outside of a P.O. box in Delaware. The money came from the Tsunami Relief Fund. I saw a flicker in his eyes, a momentary tightening, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a look of weary condescension. "Christina, you're in an entry-level job for a reason. You see a tiny piece of a very large, very complex puzzle. You don't have the full picture. Mom has relationships with consultants and experts all over the world. Some of them value their privacy. You can't just assume the worst because you don't understand something." He handed the invoice back to me, a clear dismissal. "Focus on your own work. Let Mom and me handle the strategy. We know what we're doing." I left his office feeling small and foolish, the familiar sting of being patronized burning in my cheeks. He hadn't just dismissed my concern. He had dismissed me. A few days later, I found another one. This time it was a company called Viridian Logistics, paid $150,000 for expedited shipping of medical supplies to a clinic in Haiti. Another ghost company, another Delaware P.O. box. This one was even more galling because I had personally processed the legitimate shipping manifests for that project. I knew for a fact that we used Doctors Without Borders for our logistics there, and their services were heavily discounted, almost pro bono. This payment was pure fiction. I started digging in earnest, working late, long after the glass-walled offices were dark. I created a separate, encrypted file on my personal hard drive, copying invoices, wire transfer confirmations, and corporate registration documents. I felt like a spy in my own family's business. The pattern was undeniable. A dozen shell companies, all registered in Delaware or the Cayman Islands, all receiving huge sums for vague, unverifiable services. The money was always pulled from the disaster relief and medical aid funds, the pools of money that were emotionally charged and less scrutinized by the board. In total, over the last 2 years alone, I found nearly $4 million that had vanished into this corporate fog. My grandfather's words echoed in my head. A fool or a thief, my mother was no fool. I knew going to Leo was useless. I had to go to her. I requested a meeting, and her assistant scheduled me for 15 minutes between a call with a senator and a lunch with a banking CEO. I walked into her office, a cavernous space at the corner of the top floor, decorated in shades of cream and gold. It felt more like a throne room than an office. She was sitting behind a desk the size of a small boat, looking over some documents. She didn't look up for a full minute after I entered. "Christina," she finally said, her voice cool. "I trust this is important." I laid the invoices on her desk, my hands trembling slightly. I had printed 5 of them, the most egregious examples. "I have some questions about these payments," I said, my voice barely a whisper. She picked one up, glanced at it, and then looked at me. Her expression wasn't one of surprise or concern. It was one of profound, weary disappointment, the look she had given me my entire life when I'd failed to meet her expectations. "I see," she said, her voice dangerously soft. "Leo mentioned you were having some trouble adjusting, that you were struggling to see the bigger picture." "This isn't about the bigger picture," I countered, my voice growing stronger. "This is about $4 million paid to companies that don't exist. This is fraud." The air in the room grew heavy and cold. She leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers under her chin. The look she gave me was one I will never forget. It was not the look of a mother to a daughter. It was the look of a predator sizing up a threat. "You have always been so dramatic, Christina. So prone to hyperbole. It was cute when you were a child, but it's unbecoming in an adult. You are an accountant, a bookkeeper. Your job is to process the transactions I approve. It is not your job to understand the complex, sensitive nature of our global operations. These are discretionary payments to secure cooperation in difficult regions. They are for consultants who require anonymity for their own safety. Do you have any idea how complicated it is to get things done in the developing world? The naivety is staggering." It was a masterclass in gaslighting. She was twisting my diligence into naivety, my integrity into insubordination. "A P.O. box in Delaware isn't a difficult region, Mom," I shot back. "These are shell corporations. I know what they are. Grandpa Arthur taught me what they are." The mention of her father's name made her flinch, a tiny, almost imperceptible tightening of her jaw. "Your grandfather was a small-town accountant who balanced the books for the local hardware store," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "He would not understand the scale of what we do here. He would not understand that sometimes, to achieve a greater good, one must operate in the gray areas." "There's nothing gray about this," I said, my heart pounding. "This is theft. You're stealing from sick kids and earthquake victims." She stood up then, her calm demeanor cracking to reveal the steel beneath. "You are fired, Christina. Effective immediately. You are a liability. You lack the sophistication and the loyalty to be a part of this family or this foundation. Security will escort you out. Leave your ID and your keys on the desk." I just stood there, stunned into silence. It wasn't just a job she was taking away. It was everything. My last, desperate hope of belonging. She had excommunicated me. As 2 security guards appeared at the door, she added one final, devastating blow. "I'm so disappointed in you. Your brother, he understands what it takes. He has vision. You, my dear, have your grandfather's small-mindedness. It's a shame." The family dinner that Sunday was my official shunning. My father, a man who had long ago ceded all moral authority to my mother in exchange for a life of comfort, wouldn't meet my eye. He just mumbled something about my mother knowing best. Leo was the worst. He took me aside before we sat down, his expression a mask of pained sincerity. "I'm so sorry it came to this, Chrissy," he said, his voice low. "But you really overstepped. You accused Mom of being a criminal. You have to understand how hurtful that is. She's dedicated her life to helping people." "She's a thief, Leo," I whispered, my voice raw. "And you know it. Or maybe you just don't want to know." He recoiled as if I'd slapped him. "You're just jealous," he hissed, the mask slipping. "You've always been jealous of what Mom and I have built. You couldn't cut it, so now you're trying to tear it all down. It's pathetic." At dinner, I was treated like a ghost at the feast. They talked around me about the upcoming gala, about a new donation from a tech billionaire, about Leo's brilliant new marketing initiative. It was as if I wasn't there. The message was clear. The family had closed ranks, and I was on the outside. That night, I went home to my small apartment and cried. I cried for my grandfather, for the little girl who believed in balance sheets, and for the woman who had just lost her family. But as the tears subsided, something else began to bubble up from the depths of my grief, a cold, hard resolve. My mother had called me small-minded. She had underestimated me, and that was going to be the biggest mistake of her life. The next 2 years were a quiet war. I took a job at a mid-sized accounting firm, a place of comforting, boring legitimacy. I paid my bills. I lived a small life, and I watched. I watched the foundation's annual reports. I watched my mother's interviews. I watched her accept award after award, her lies growing more polished with each retelling. The anger in me didn't fade. It consolidated, hardening from a raging fire into a diamond-hard point of purpose. I kept the encrypted file, my secret dossier of her crimes. I knew it wasn't enough to go to the authorities. My mother's lawyers would bury me in litigation, paint me as a disgruntled, vindictive daughter. A family dispute. I needed more. I needed irrefutable proof, and I needed a platform so loud and so public that she couldn't spin her way out of it. The announcement that she was to receive the International Humanitarian of the Year award was the signal. It was the peak of her hubris, the apex of her hypocrisy. It was the perfect stage. I knew then it was time. I spent a week researching investigative journalists in the city. I needed someone sharp, someone who wasn't afraid of a powerful target, someone who was on the outside, just like me. I found him in Marcus Thorne. Marcus had a reputation for being a bulldog. He'd broken a story about city council corruption that had led to 2 resignations. He worked for a slightly scrappy online news outlet that prioritized deep dives over clickbait. He was perfect. Our first meeting was in a noisy, dimly lit coffee shop far from the city center. I had emailed him from a Proton Mail account, giving him just enough information to pique his interest. I have documented proof of massive financial fraud at the heart of a major philanthropic foundation. Are you interested in a story that will bring down an empire? He had replied with one word: when. He was younger than I expected, with tired eyes that lit up with a fierce intelligence when he spoke. He listened intently as I laid out the basics, my voice low. I didn't give him everything at first, just the concept, the shell corporations, the siphoned funds, my mother at the center of it all. I watched his face for any sign of disbelief, but all I saw was growing concentration. "This is a hell of an accusation," he said, leaning forward. "You're talking about Eleanor Vance. She's a civic icon. You need more than a few suspicious invoices to touch her. You need a smoking gun." "I have more than a few invoices," I said. I slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was a printout of the wire transfer confirmation to Ethelred Solutions, and next to it, the corporate registration for Ethelred, showing it was registered to a holding company that I had managed to trace back to my mother's personal wealth manager. It wasn't a direct link to her name, but it was one degree of separation. It was the start of the chain. Marcus stared at the paper for a long time. The tired look in his eyes was gone, replaced by the hungry gleam of a predator who has caught the scent of blood. "Okay," he said slowly. "You have my attention. Show me everything." Over the next 3 months, Marcus and I became a 2-person special investigations unit. We met in secret, poring over the documents I had smuggled out of the foundation. My initial file was the key that unlocked everything. Marcus had resources I didn't. He had access to databases that could trace international money flows. He had sources who could talk off the record. He treated me not as a jilted daughter, but as a credible source, a partner. For the first time in years, I felt seen. I felt validated. My knowledge of the Foundation's internal systems was invaluable. I knew their accounting software, their server architecture. I even remembered some of the old administrative passwords they were too lazy to change. One night, fueled by coffee and righteous anger, I managed to gain remote access to their server for a window of just 10 minutes, long enough to download the Holy Grail, the full unredacted general ledger for the past 5 years. It was all there. Millions. Not just the $4 million I had initially found, but closer to $15 million, funneled through an even more complex network of shells and pass-through accounts. The money was being used to fund a lavish lifestyle that went far beyond what my father's legitimate income could support: a villa in Tuscany, a private jet lease through a shell company, Art Acquisitions. It was a slush fund disguised as charity. Marcus was ecstatic. "This is it, Christina," he said, his eyes wide as he looked at the spreadsheet on my laptop screen. "This is the smoking gun, the cannon, the whole damn arsenal." With the evidence secured, we moved on to the second phase of the plan, the delivery. A news story would be big, but it could be managed, spun, denied. I wanted something undeniable, something that would strip away my mother's carefully constructed facade in front of the very people whose admiration she craved most. The Gala. "The Gala is a fortress," Marcus warned. "Their security is top-notch. You can't just walk in and hijack their presentation." "I'm not going to walk in," I said. "I'm going to be invited." I had an idea, a wild, audacious one. The Gala was a massive production, and the foundation outsourced its audiovisual management to a third-party company, Event Horizons Tech. I spent a week learning everything I could about them. They often hired freelance technicians for large events. I polished my resume, highlighting my limited experience with presentation software and my fictional background in live event support. I created a fake portfolio. Then, I applied for a temporary position as an AV technician for the fall season. It was a long shot, but my desperation made me bold. To my astonishment, I got an interview. I aced it, talking a good game about codecs and signal flows, using jargon I had crammed from YouTube tutorials. I was hired. For the next 2 months, I worked small corporate events, learning the systems, the equipment, the protocols. I was good at it. The work was precise, logical. It was like accounting, but with lights and sound. I kept my head down, made myself reliable and invisible. And I waited for the job assignment that I knew would come: the Eleanor Vance Foundation annual gala. A week before the gala, my phone rang. It was my mother. I hadn't spoken to her in 2 years. Not since the day she fired me. My heart hammered against my ribs. I almost didn't answer, but some morbid curiosity made me press the green button. "Christina, darling." Her voice was like warm honey, dripping with a sweetness I knew was poison. "I was just thinking about you. I know we've had our disagreements, but you're still my daughter. It would mean the world to me if you would come to the gala on Saturday to see me receive this award. It's a moment for the whole family, and you are part of this family." I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. She didn't want a loose cannon, an estranged daughter, casting a shadow on her big night. My presence would complete the picture of the perfect, supportive family. It was a strategic move, not an emotional one. The old me, the younger, more desperate Christina, would have wept with relief. She would have seen this as the olive branch she had always longed for. But I was not that person anymore. I knew this wasn't about love or reconciliation. It was about optics. "I'm not sure I can make it, Mom," I said, my voice carefully neutral. There was a pause. "Oh," she said, the honey turning to ice for a fraction of a second before warming up again. "Well, please try, darling. I'll have a ticket for you at the door." For me, the call ended, but it had accomplished something she never intended. It had vaporized any last, lingering speck of doubt I might have had. My resolve was now absolute. She wasn't just a thief. She was a manipulator of the highest order, willing to use her own daughter's love as a tool. She wanted me in the audience, a silent, smiling prop for her perfect evening. Little did she know I would be there. But I wouldn't be in the audience. I'd be in the control booth running the show. The night of the gala was a blur of controlled chaos. The ballroom of the city's most expensive hotel was a sea of glittering gowns, tuxedos, and the blinding flash of cameras. I was dressed in the all-black uniform of the AV crew, a headset over my ears, a tool belt around my waist. I was invisible, just another worker scurrying in the shadows. But my heart was a drum solo against my ribs. I had the presentation on a sandboxed, encrypted USB drive, hidden in a small pocket of my belt. The flowchart was a work of art, a masterpiece of financial damnation. Marcus had helped me design it for maximum impact. Stark black background, with blood-red lines connecting my mother's photo to the logos of the shell corporations and then branching out to images of the Tuscan villa, the private jet, the priceless art. At the bottom, in bold white letters, was the grand total, $15,284,312. Marcus was already inside, seated at a front-row press table, looking deceptively calm. He caught my eye once as I did a final check on the stage wiring, and he gave me the slightest of nods. It was all the encouragement I needed. My station was in a small, elevated booth at the back of the ballroom, a cramped space filled with monitors, mixing boards, and the hum of electronics. I was assigned to manage the main presentation screens, the 3 massive LED walls behind the stage. My supervisor, a harried man named Gary, trusted me. I had been his most reliable tech for 2 months. "Just run the pre-show loop until the speeches start, Christina," he said, barely looking at me. "Then cue up the tribute video for Mrs. Vance. It's File EV Tribute Final. Do not mess this up. The whole world is watching." "You can count on me, Gary," I said, my voice preternaturally calm. The evening dragged on. There were speeches from the mayor, from the tech billionaire donor, all extolling my mother's virtues. They called her a visionary, a savior, a force of nature. With every word of praise, the knot in my stomach tightened. I could see my family at the head table. My father, looking proud and blissfully ignorant. My brother Leo, soaking in the reflected glory, his smile as wide and empty as ever. And my mother. She was radiant, bathed in the warm glow of the stage lights, accepting the adulation as if it were oxygen. She looked regal, untouchable. Not for long, I thought. Finally, the moment came. The presenter, a famous news anchor, read a glowing introduction and announced the winner of the International Humanitarian of the Year Award, Eleanor Vance. The room erupted in a standing ovation. The sound was deafening. My mother rose, kissed my father and brother, and glided to the stage. She looked out at the audience, her eyes shining with what looked like humility, a performance she had perfected over decades. "Thank you," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you all. I am so humbled, so deeply honored to accept this award, but I do not accept it for myself. I accept it on behalf of the forgotten, the voiceless, the people our foundation strives to serve every single day." I watched her on my monitor, my hand resting on the keyboard. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. This was it. The point of no return. "Everything has to balance, Chrissy." My grandfather's voice was as clear as if he were standing next to me. Eleanor continued her speech, her voice swelling with practiced sincerity. "We live in a world of such abundance, yet so many suffer. Our mission, my life's work, has been to bridge that gap, to take the blessings we have been given and share them. It is a sacred trust. A trust one have built with my family, with my brilliant son, Leo, who will carry on this work, and even with my daughter, Christina, who I hope is watching tonight. This is your legacy, too." Hearing my name from her lips, used as a prop in her grand deception, was the final push I needed. My hand was steady now. My vision was clear. In the booth, Gary was focused on the audio mix. My moment was now. I took a deep breath. With 3 clicks of the mouse, I bypassed the main presentation file. I inserted my USB drive into a secondary port I had tested earlier in the day. I uploaded my file. It took less than 5 seconds. On the stage, Eleanor was reaching her crescendo. And so I dedicate this award to the simple, powerful idea that one person, one family, can make a difference. We are all accountable. She never got to finish that sentence. Because it was at that exact moment that I hit enter. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the 3 massive screens behind her, which had been displaying the foundation's elegant blue and gold logo, flickered and went black. A collective gasp went through the room. Eleanor paused, a slight frown of annoyance on her face, assuming a technical glitch. And then, the new image resolved itself on the screens, 60 feet wide and 20 feet high. It was my flowchart. In the center, a smiling professional headshot of my mother. From her picture, thick red lines snaked out to the logos of Ethelred Solutions, Viridian Logistics, and 10 other shell corporations. From those boxes, more red lines led to photographs of the villa, the jet, the multi-million-dollar necklace she was wearing at that very moment. And at the bottom, the number, glowing in the dark, $15,284,312. There was a moment of absolute, deafening silence. The entire room, 1,000 of the city's most powerful people, just stared, their brains trying to process the impossible image. They looked from the screen to my mother and back again. The self-congratulatory warmth in the room vanished, replaced by a sudden, glacial chill. Eleanor had turned, following the audience's gaze. I watched her face on the close-up monitor as she saw it. The mask didn't just crack, it shattered. The benevolent, humble humanitarian disappeared, and for a terrifying second, the real Eleanor was exposed. Her face went slack with shock, then contorted into a mask of pure, undiluted fury. Her eyes, wide with horror, darted around the room, searching for the source of the betrayal. The silence was broken by a single, loud voice from the front row. "Mrs. Vance. Marcus Thorne, Global Press. Is the amount on that screen correct? Is it true your foundation has funneled over $15 million into offshore shell companies linked to your personal assets?" The question, amplified by the microphones still live on the lectern, echoed through the ballroom. It was the signal. A cacophony erupted. The pop of flashbulbs was like gunfire. Other journalists, smelling blood, began shouting questions. People were standing up, pointing, whispering, pulling out their phones to record the gigantic, damning graphic. I saw my brother Leo's face. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. His jaw was hanging open, his face pale with confusion and dawning horror as he stared at the screen. My father looked utterly lost, his face ashen. My mother, cornered and exposed, did the only thing she could. She grabbed the microphone. "This is a lie," she shrieked, her voice shrill and unrecognizable. "This is a malicious, slanderous attack. A technical hack. Security." But it was too late. The image was burned into 1,000 retinas, recorded on 100 phones. The truth was out, and it was spectacular. In the booth, my supervisor, Gary, was staring at me, his face a mixture of terror and disbelief. He looked at my screen, which still showed the file path from my USB drive, then back at me. He didn't say a word. I calmly removed my headset, placed it on the console, and without looking back, I walked out of the booth, down the service stairs, and out a side exit into the cool night air. The sirens were already starting in the distance. I met Marcus at our prearranged rendezvous point, a 24-hour diner miles away from the chaos. He slid into the booth opposite me, a wide, incredulous grin on his face. He was vibrating with adrenaline. "You did it," he breathed, shaking his head in disbelief. "You actually did it. I have never seen anything like it." The whole room imploded. I just nodded, my body starting to tremble now that the adrenaline was wearing off. I felt hollowed out, exhausted, but also strangely, profoundly calm. It was done. The lie was broken. Marcus's phone was buzzing nonstop on the table. He glanced at it. My article just went live. The server is already crashing from the traffic. It's the biggest story of the year. We sat there in the Greasy Spoon Diner, under the hum of fluorescent lights, as the empire my mother had built began to burn. My own phone, which I had kept on silent, started to light up. A barrage of texts and missed calls. First from Leo. The messages were a frantic jumble of confusion and rage. Asterisk, "What did you do? They're calling you a hacker. You've ruined us. How could you?" Asterisk then, a call from my father, which went to a voicemail I knew would be a weak, pleading mess. And finally, a single terrifying text from my mother. It didn't ask a question. It was a statement, a curse. Asterisk, "You are no longer my daughter. You will pay for this." Asterisk, I read the words and felt a surprising pang, not of fear, but of pity. Even now, exposed and disgraced, her only instinct was to threaten, to control. She still didn't get it. I wasn't afraid of her anymore. I switched my phone off and pushed it to the side. I looked at Marcus. "What happens now?" He took a sip of his coffee. "Now," he said, his eyes serious, "the real story begins. Investigations. Legal battles. It's going to be a long road. But you did the right thing, Christina. You told the truth. For the first time, I believed him. The following days were a media firestorm. The story was everywhere, on every news channel, every newspaper front page, every blog. The flowchart was iconic, a viral symbol of corporate greed masquerading as charity. My name was out there, too. Some painted me as a heroic whistleblower, others as a vindictive daughter. My apartment was besieged by reporters, and I had to move in with a friend to escape the constant glare. Marcus connected me with an excellent lawyer, a woman named Sarah who specialized in whistleblower protection cases. She was sharp, no nonsense, and she believed me. They will try to destroy you, Sarah warned me during our first meeting. They will paint you as unstable, a liar, a thief who stole corporate data. Our job is to stay ahead of their narrative with the one thing they can't fight, the truth, backed by meticulous documentation. The official investigations began almost immediately. The district attorney's office launched a criminal probe. The IRS started an audit. The Foundation's board of directors, a collection of powerful people now desperate to distance themselves from the scandal, suspended my mother and brother and announced a full internal investigation. The beautiful glass building that was once my personal hell was now a crime scene, swarming with forensic accountants and investigators, picking apart the digital bones I had first uncovered. It was surreal watching it all unfold from a distance, like seeing a controlled demolition of my own past. A week after the gala, I got a call from Leo. His voice was different. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a broken, hollow tone. "Can we meet?" he asked. "Please, Chrissy. I need to understand." We met in a quiet park. He looked terrible. He had lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked older, smaller. We sat on a bench, not looking at each other. "I've seen the full ledger," he said quietly. "The investigators showed it to me. The villa in Tuscany. I was there last summer. She told me it was a corporate retreat center for our top donors." He shook his head, a bitter, self-mocking laugh escaping his lips. "A corporate retreat center." I believed her. I believed everything. He finally turned to look at me, his eyes filled with a shame so profound it was painful to witness. "You tried to tell me. You came to my office, and I called you jealous. I called you pathetic. I was so blind. I was so desperate for her approval, I didn't want to see it. It's easier to be the golden child if you don't ask any questions." "I know," I said softly. And I did. I knew that feeling of desperately wanting to belong, to be good enough. Our paths had just been different. He had achieved it through willful blindness. I had been cast out for seeing too clearly. "I'm so sorry, Christina," he whispered, his voice cracking. "For everything. It wasn't a magic fix. It didn't erase years of hurt. But it was a start. It was the first crack of honesty in the wall that had stood between us for our entire lives." A year passed. The legal machinery grinds slowly, but it grinds fine. The Vance Foundation was dismantled, its remaining legitimate assets transferred to other charities under court supervision. My father, who was cleared of any direct involvement but ruined by association, divorced my mother and retired into a life of quiet obscurity. Leo, in exchange for his full cooperation and testimony against our mother, received a lighter sentence, a hefty fine and 5 years of probation. He had lost everything, but in a strange way, he was freer than he had ever been. And Eleanor Vance, the humanitarian of the year, was found guilty on multiple counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. She was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. I testified at the trial. Sitting in that witness box, speaking my truth under oath, was the final act of my liberation. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just calm, clear, and certain. I answered the questions, presented the facts, and told my story. My real story. After the trial, I used the small inheritance my grandfather had left me, the one my mother always derided as small-town money, to start a small nonprofit. We didn't have a glass tower or a fancy name. We were called the Balance Sheet Project. We provide pro bono forensic accounting services to small charities, helping them ensure their donations are being used properly, helping them build the kind of trust that my mother had so expertly faked. It's quiet work. It doesn't win awards, but it's real. One day, a letter arrived at my office. The return address was a federal correctional facility. It was from my mother. My hands shook as I opened it. For a moment, I was afraid of the words inside, afraid they would still have the power to wound me. The letter was just a few lines, written in her elegant, familiar script. "Christina," it began. Asterisk, "They say that in prison, you have nothing but time to think. I have thought about the choices I made. I have thought about the woman I became. I convinced myself that the good I was doing outweighed the bad. I was wrong. I see that now. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I hope one day you can understand that I did, in my own broken way, love you." Asterisk, I read the letter 3 times. Was it genuine remorse? A final, desperate attempt at manipulation? A plea for pity from a woman who had lost everything? I honestly didn't know. And what I realized in that quiet moment in my small, unassuming office was that it didn't matter. Her validation, her approval, her love, or her lack of it, was no longer the sun my world revolved around. My worth wasn't tied to her opinion of me. It never had been. I had found my own balance sheet, and it was finally in the black. I folded the letter, placed it in a drawer, and went back to work. Looking back on it all, the journey from being the family outcast to the woman I am today was longer and harder than I could have ever imagined. The real victory wasn't in the courtroom or on the front page of the news. The real victory happened quietly, inside of me. It was the moment I realized that my own integrity was more valuable than my family's approval. It was the discovery that my voice, a voice they had tried so hard to silence, was actually powerful. The greatest lesson I learned is that your value is not determined by the people who refuse to see it. It is something you define for yourself through your actions, your principles, and your courage to stand up for the truth, even when you're standing alone. And sometimes, the very things people criticize you for, being too sensitive, too questioning, too difficult, are actually your greatest strengths in disguise. Thank you all so much for listening to my story. It's not an easy one to tell, but I believe in the power of sharing our truths. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between what was easy and what was right? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might be the one someone else needs to hear today. And if this story resonated with you, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories about finding strength in the face of adversity. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I hope it inspires you to always honor your own truth, no matter how much it costs.